Hey everyone, tonight we're diving into the final disturbing days of one of history's most notorious kings, Henry VIII. He was once the Golden Prince of England, athletic, charismatic, powerful. But by the end of his life he was barely recognizable, grotesquely obese, plagued by disease and consumed by paranoia. This isn't the story they tell you in history class. Tonight we uncover the horrible death of Henry VIII, his pain, his paranoia, and the decaying empire he left behind. So, dim the lights, grab something warm to sip on, and let's travel back to Tudor England. Let's rewind the clock. Before Henry became the bloated tyrant, he was England's golden boy. Born in 1491, Henry was tall, athletic, and handsome. Think of a royal version of a modern-day celebrity, someone who dominated every room he walked into. He could joust, dance, compose music, even write theological arguments. The people loved him. The nobility feared him. The church would eventually regret ever getting in his way. But this king had a fatal flaw. He was obsessed with legacy, specifically having a male heir. And that obsession, slow burning at first, would become the poison that hollowed him from the inside out. Fast forward a couple decades. The once vibrant king was now well into middle age. Years of feasting, drinking and stress were taking a toll, but there was one injury that changed everything. In 1536, while jousting, yes, at age 44, Henry suffered a catastrophic leg injury. His horse fell. He was crushed, unconscious for 2 hours. Doctors saved him, but something was lost that day. The leg wound never healed properly. It became ulcerated, infected, and increasingly debilitating. It oozed pus. It smelled foul. Imagine rotting meat wrapped in velvet robes. Henry became immobile. He ballooned to over 400 pounds. Servants had to use mechanical hoists to lift him. His once sharp mind dulled with pain and painkillers. He became angry, irrational, dangerous. This was no longer a king. This was a ticking time bomb on a throne of lies. Pain changes people. For Henry, it turned him from a golden boy into a tyrant of terrifying proportions. He executed 2 of his wives, dozens of advisors, close friends. Even Thomas More, a man who once cradled his own children, was beheaded on Henry's order. But the scariest part, he believed he was doing God's work. Henry declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, not out of pure theology, but because the Pope wouldn't let him divorce Catherine of Aragon. The Reformation wasn't a slow shift. It was a violent snap. And behind it all was a man in constant agony, lashing out at the world as his body rotted beneath him. In his final years, Henry became paranoid to the point of delusion. He feared plots, betrayal, witches, anything that could explain why his health failed and his wives disappointed him. His leg ulcers worsened. Doctors tried everything: cauterization, draining, even placing raw meat on the wound to draw out the poison. Spoiler: it didn't work. His gout flared so badly that he couldn't walk. He spent days in bed, ranting and sweating, hallucinating visions of his lost youth and dead wives. He reeked, literally. His courtiers had to mask the stench with incense and perfumes. Some say Henry knew he was dying. Others say he was convinced he couldn't die. After all, hadn't God chosen him? He was both a king and a prisoner, trapped inside a decaying body that no amount of power could save. By January 1547, Henry VIII was a shadow of himself. His doctors feared telling him he was dying, because doing so could be considered treason. Instead, they whispered prayers and burned candles, hoping to appease God and the dying king. On the 28th of January, in the early hours, Henry breathed his last breath. No pomp, no crowd, just a bloated, broken body, once king of all England, now gone. But what happened after he died? That's where things get even more disturbing. His coffin began to leak fluids. It burst open on the way to the tomb. Dogs were seen, licking the blood and rot from the floorboards beneath it. A chilling echo of a prophecy once made about him. Some say it was poetic justice. Others, that it was just biology catching up with a man who lived like a god. But Henry's story doesn't end with death. His will was twisted. His heirs, Edward, Mary, and Elizabeth, each carried pieces of his fractured legacy. Launce, the golden boy of England, reduced to a bloated, festering monarch who ruled with paranoia and pain. But death did not end his story. In many ways, it made things worse. Tonight, we pick up where we left off, with a coffin leaking royal rot, a court unsure of its future, and a nation about to be thrown into chaos. Let's uncover the shocking aftermath of Henry VIII's death, his twisted funeral, the war for power, and the long, rotting shadow he cast over England. Henry died in the early hours of January 28, 1547, and what came next was both grotesque and poetic. His embalming was botched. His body was so swollen and filled with gases that it began to leak within days. By the time it was placed in the coffin, decomposition had already started. The journey to Windsor Castle, where he was to be buried beside Jane Seymour, his true queen, was slow. Cold January air helped, but it wasn't enough. Somewhere along the way, the coffin began to ooze. Thick black liquid pooled beneath it. Dogs were seen licking the blood and fluids off the church floor at Sion Abbey, a scene that, disturbingly, echoed an old prophecy. The king's body shall burst and the dogs shall lap his blood. Whether truth or legend, it was a macabre punctuation mark to a life of excess. Despite the grotesque state of his body, Henry was given one of the most lavish funerals in English history. The procession was immense, over 1,000 mourners. Black banners. A wax effigy of Henry sat atop the coffin, looking far more regal than the bloated corpse inside. The man who had ripped England away from Rome, who had shattered monasteries and ordered the deaths of queens, was laid to rest. With full Catholic-like grandeur. Hypocrisy? Maybe. But that's the Tudor way. Dignity on the outside, decay beneath. He was buried in St. George's Chapel at Windsor, next to Jane Seymour, the one wife who had given him a male heir and died before disappointing him. But there was no grand tomb, no towering statue, just a simple slab. For a man who obsessed over legacy, Henry was buried quietly, forgotten by design. Before he died, Henry drafted a massive 17,000-word will. In it, he tried to control England from beyond the grave. He named his son Edward as heir. If Edward died without children, the crown would pass to Mary, then Elizabeth. Seems logical, right? But there was a problem. Henry also created a regency council, a group of men who would govern for young Edward until he came of age. But that council was a ticking time bomb of egos and ambition. Almost immediately, Edward Seymour, Henry's brother-in-law, muscled his way into becoming Lord Protector. Power plays began. Betrayals multiplied. Henry had tried to script England's future. Instead, he lit the fuse on a bloody family feud. Henry's 3 legitimate children would each take the throne, and each would carry the scars of his reign. Edward VI ruled first. A sickly boy of just 9 years old, he was a puppet for powerful nobles. Protestant reforms swept through England, undoing much of Henry's compromise between old and new. But Edward wouldn't last. He died at just 15, likely from tuberculosis. Some say poison. Either way, the Reformation child was gone. Next came Mary the Sepon's, Henry's eldest daughter with Catherine of Aragon. A devout Catholic, she sought to reverse her father's changes. She burned Protestants, hundreds, earned the nickname Bloody Mary. Her reign was bloody, short, and haunted by phantom pregnancies, echoes of Henry's obsession with male heirs. And then came Elizabeth, the daughter of Anne Boleyn, declared illegitimate by Henry. She rose from political rubble to become one of England's greatest monarchs. But even she ruled with the weight of Henry's legacy on her shoulders. His break with Rome, his paranoia, his obsession with control. None of his children married, none had heirs. The Tudor line ended with Elizabeth. Maybe it was poetic. The line of the man who destroyed everything in search of legacy died with silence. So how should we remember Henry VIII? As a visionary, a tyrant, a madman, a reformer. He left behind. That transformed England, richer, more powerful, more centralized, but also bloodied, scarred, and fractured. His split from the Catholic Church reshaped Europe. His creation of the Church of England still affects millions today. But beneath the politics and power plays was a man who lived in fear, fear of being forgotten, of being weak, of being replaced. In the end, his worst fear came true. He was replaced, again and again, by children, by rivals, by time. He ruled for nearly 40 years, killed thousands, married 6 women, and died alone, leaking fluids into a coffin no one dared open. That's not the glorious end of a mighty king. That's the grim reality of unchecked power and human fragility. Thanks for joining me on this dark journey through history. If you enjoyed this 2-part deep dive into the brutal death and legacy of Henry VIII, give this video a like, subscribe for more History with Bite, and let me know in the comments which twisted chapter of history you'd like to see next. Until next time, beware the crown. It comes with thorns.